This is the pattern. Copy the size you're interested in and make the front piece twice. You are going to need one for your right and one for your left. I am using faux fur and I have pinned the pieces like this. Take notice of in what direction the fur lies. And then I add 1 centimeter in seam allowance. When you cut, make sure that you do not cut all the hairs, so I cut close to the bottom fabric. Make small notches, as you can see in the pattern. This is the lining fabric, and I lay this back piece towards a folded edge, and I add 1 centimeter in seam allowance. Lay the pieces right sides together and start by pinning the sides. So with 1 centimeter in seam allowance and a straight stitch. If you want straps, you can cut ribbons and you can pin them on the right side where you have the notches. So these ribbons should be in between the layers of fabric. Pin the pieces right sides together. Try to separate the seam allowances. On the shoulder I make markings about 2 centimeters from the top because I'm not going to sew there. Sew with the straight stitch and 1 centimeter in seam allowance. As you see, I have not sewn on the shoulders or close to the shoulders. I cut small notches in the seam allowance to give it some ease when I turn the right sides out. Through one of the back openings, I turn the right sides out. You can use a comb to take out all the fur from the seam. Pin the shoulders right sides together and sew the fur part. Separate the seam allowance and fold in the seam allowance in the neckline. Pin it, and then you do the same in the armhole, and then you pin also your lining. You should not have any raw edges visible. I'm going to sew by hand, and I'm using a sewing needle and sewing thread. I start with a knot on the thread, and then I sew with a slip stitch. A slip stitch is when you sew a small stitch on the one side, for example the fur side, and then you jump straight over to the lining and you sew a small stitch forward, as you can see how I do here. And if you want, you can sew a straight stitch close to the edge on the outer edge to make it more sturdy. And you can use a comb to take away the fur from the seam. And once you have finished everything, you can start using your fur vest. If you want this pattern, you can follow my Patreon, Sew for Kids.